In today's video, Magnus Carlsen destroys Arjun Erigaisi in just 27 moves at the 2024 Speed Chess Championships. Now in the game, Magnus Carlsen opens 1e4 best by test, and Arjun Erigaisi, instead of e5 or c5, the main lines, he actually goes 1e6, the French defense on the board, and his idea is to go d5, breaking in the center. Now here, Magnus, the main line is going to be d4, of course, but here, Magnus, he mixes things up, and he actually goes knight to f3. What is the idea behind this move? Well, let's find out. Here, Arjun goes d5, the standard French defense move, and now Magnus, instead of d4 or e takes d5, he actually goes e5, expanding in the center, but without that move d4 on the board. Very interesting choice. Now Arjun, c5, expanding on the queen side, and Magnus goes c3, the idea being try to control d4 without going d4 himself yet. And now in this position, Arjun Erigaisi does have the option of playing the very strong idea, d4, expanding in the center right away. However, instead of that, knight c6 on the board, and Arjun is just staying flexible in this French defense position. Now here, Magnus, what is he going to do about that light squared bishop on f1? Where is it going to go? Well, in the game, Magnus goes g3 here, intending bishop g2 with the fianchetto of the light squared bishop, and then short castles. And now here, Arjun Erigaisi, he senses that Magnus Carlsen is playing very slow here, and so with that in mind, he breaks on the king side with the Finegold counterattack. Yes, that's right, the move f6, Ben Finegold's favorite move on the chessboard. Now here, Magnus, his best idea is going to be d4, expanding in the center and supporting that pawn on e5. That way, if black does take on e5, Magnus can take back with the d-pawn, and he will maintain a very strong pawn on the e5 square. Now, instead of that, in this game, he actually takes on f6, e takes f6, but now Arjun Erigaisi, after the move knight takes f6, he is the one with the better pawn structure in the center of the board, and he does have a slight advantage here. All right, Magnus, bishop g2, and Arjun Erigaisi playing very solid, bishop d6 on the board. Of course, e5 immediately may have been a little bit stronger, but instead Arjun playing it nice and safe and solid in this game with bishop d6. All right, now Magnus, he castles, and Arjun again does not go e5. Instead, he just castles as well. So, short castles on the board. Now here, Magnus, he finally expands in the center with the move d4. Magnus trying to control the center of the board. And now Arjun, bishop d7, a very solid move. His idea from here is to get the rest of his pieces into the game. He may want to go queen c7, rook a to e8, and then play it by ear. Now Magnus, what is his main idea here? Well, he starts rook to e1, putting the rook on the open e-file, and from here he is going to try to put pressure on black's very powerful center with the pawns on e6, d5, and c5. Now Arjun, queen c7, a very good square for the queen, and now Magnus, bishop e3, very good move, putting pressure on c5, and the threat now is simply d takes c5, winning a pawn. So Arjun has to respond. In the game, he takes on d4, c takes d4, and then c takes d4 for Magnus. And now here in this position, Arjun Erigaisi is a very aggressive player, and he finds a very aggressive attacking idea. Yes, that's right, knight g4 on the board, hitting the bishop and also pressuring the very weak f2 point in Magnus Carlsen's position. Now, very importantly, in this position here, Magnus, he cannot move the bishop. For example, if he goes, say, bishop g5, that would be an absolute disaster. For example, bishop g5, then Arjun will have the idea of knight takes f2, sacrificing the knight for the pawn. The main idea being, number one, Magnus will be weak on this f-file. Number two, Arjun will have the resource knight takes d4, trying to open up this diagonal for the bishop, getting to the king. And trust me, that will be a tactical disaster for Magnus. So instead here, instead of moving the bishop, Magnus just goes knight c3. By far the best move. He's spotting the idea of knight takes f2, and he's having none of that in this game. Now here, Arjun, he takes on e3, knight takes, then rook takes, and yes, this is a very big accomplishment for Arjun. He has the bishop pair, those two Bs on d7 and d6. That is going to be a big asset for him in this game. Now here, Magnus, one of his biggest threats here is going to be knight to b5, trying to win back that bishop pair immediately, trying to fork the queen and the bishop on d6. Therefore, Arjun takes a moment to go a6, trying to control that b5 square. However, this move is a little bit slow, and it does run into problems. Instead, moves like queen to b6 or perhaps rook a to e8 immediately would have been stronger. Instead, a6 on the board, and now Magnus Carlsen, the Punisher. He immediately punishes Arjun Erigaisi for this one little tiny mistake. He starts knight to g5, a very, very strong idea. First of all, you are opening up the king side. For example, the queen now has access to the h5 square. But beyond that, very importantly here, Magnus Carlsen, he is potentially threatening bishop takes d5, giving up the bishop, but then winning the pawn on d5 with the knight with all sorts of threats. All right, Arjun Erigaisi, what is he going to do about all these threats? Well, in the game, he responds to the immediate threat of knight takes e6, and he goes rook to f6 trying to defend. However, this turns out to be an absolutely catastrophic mistake. And here, Magnus Carlsen, in this position, he sacrifices the bishop on d5. Bishop takes d5 on the board, an absolutely brilliant idea. The immediate threat, if black takes back on d5, then you have knight takes d5, forking both the queen and the rook on the new f6 square. And that is what happens. Here, e takes d5. If black doesn't take, he's down a pawn and he's going to get blown off the board. So e takes d5, the best move, but then knight takes d5, again, forking the queen on c7 and the rook. The queen has to move. So in the gate, queen d8, the best square for the queen. Try to get it over to the king side. And now after knight takes and then queen takes, here Magnus, he has to find the right way to increase the pressure, and he finds it in a heartbeat. The key move for Magnus here is going to be queen to b3, hitting the king on g8, forcing potentially king to f8 or king to h8. And here already, it's only move 19, but Arjun Erigaisi is in a world of trouble. Now, real fast, if you're enjoying this content, please smash that YouTube like button for me. It helps me out so much. Thank you so much for doing that. Now, here, black. In the game, it goes king to h8. That is the best square for the king. However, Arjun runs into the idea of knight to f7 from Magnus. So, knight f7 on the board. The king has to move. Obviously, queen takes f7, not a possibility. So, instead, king g8, but now Magnus, he has all sorts of different discovered attacks with the knight. In the game, he just repeats moves. He's playing with his food. So, knight g5, king to h8, knight f7, king g8, and here Magnus, of course, he does not repeat moves anymore. He simply takes the bishop on d6. Knight takes d6 on the board, winning the bishop. And of course, the queen once again is hitting the king with check. Where is the king going to go? Well, king to f8 is not a possibility. If you do that, you run the rook to f3 immediately, pinning the queen to the king. So, king to h8 on the board for Ergaisi instead. But now Magnus, he jumps back in with the knight. Knight to f7, once again harassing the king. And now in this position already, Magnus is up the exchange and 2 pawns. He has the extra rook versus the extra bishop of black, but Magnus also has 2 pawns. And here he is just going for the kill immediately. So, king to g8 on the board. And now Magnus, the key idea, knight to e5, hitting the king with the queen, but also threatening knight takes d7. And what is Arjun Erigaisi going to do to defend? In the game, he finds the only temporary move to hold off the inevitable. He goes bishop e6, both defending the bishop on the e6 square and blocking the check by the queen. However, now Magnus, he spots that free pawn on b7. He jumps in immediately. Queen takes b7 on the board, threatening both the rook on a8 and the knight on c6. What is Arjun going to do? Well, in the game, rook to f8, a very good idea, threatening queen takes f2, winning a pawn and opening up threats against the white king, and also hitting the rook on e3 potentially. However, here Magnus, he has everything under control, and he plays one final very precise move. Rook to f3, hitting the queen and the rook behind it. Here Magnus is up material. He's going to win more material, for example, that knight on c6. And in this position, Arjun Erigaisi resigns on the spot on move 27 to the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. Wow, what a game by Arjun Erigaisi and Magnus Carlsen today. All right, Chess YouTube, if you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. Thank you so much for doing that. And while you're at it, check out this video right here, where Arjun Erigaisi absolutely destroyed Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in the finals of the WR Masters Cup to win the tournament. That game's incredible. Check it out. And I'll see you in the next video.